Okay, all right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. First of all, for those of you who just joined, my name is Marlene Calabrese, and I am a trainer, account manager here at Workamajig. And today we're going to be talking about project workflows. And what we define, for this session, we only have an hour here together for this webinar for project workflows, is really three different ways to open a project. We're going to talk about just opening a project without any kind of form being filled out or anything, just going straight to opening a new project. We'll model that mostly so we can show you all the different features that are available with the project workflow. And then we'll show you, or we'll talk about, at least we won't go into great detail, but the fact that you can open either from a project request form, which is most typically used by our internal marketing groups. So a casino, say, for instance, that uses Workamajig has their own marketing team, and somebody on the food and beverage department, the food and beverage manager, needs a new menu created. So they would actually initiate, they'd log into Workamajig with a free login, and they would initiate a project request form where they would fill out possibly a spec sheet. They provide all the information needed to start the project. And, we originally saw that as more for our Marcoms, internal marketing groups. However, we have seen some of our regular ad agencies using this feature as well, just to kind of organize things. So if that's new to your company, you're not using project request forms and you want deeper training on that, we actually would say go to your account manager and they'll give you full training. So that training in and of itself is about an hour. So we'll just touch on it briefly as a workflow. And yes, somebody just asked, is there video to this call? There is. Right now, you should just be seeing the Workamajig icon there. But yes, we are going to share a Workamajig instance here in just a minute, as soon as we talk about what we're going to talk about. So after project request forms, there's an opportunity, and that's more on the sales side of things. So you'll have your sales team, maybe they use Salesforce. Well, they could replace that with Workamajig. And we do have a workflow for that. That again is like another hour-long training that would be free for you to reach out to your account manager. And we also have some videos, which I'll show you where that is located here in just a bit. But that workflow too kind of opens like a pseudo project, if you will. So we'll talk about those two. We won't go into deep information on that because they are their own training sessions, but we're going to start with just showing you how to open a project and kind of what we call the Workamajig way, which what we mean by that is like the optimized way to use the tool the way it was designed. Of course, it's very customizable. So if you choose to do something different, it's not that it's incorrect. It's just that we want to show you what we would think would be the easiest way to do it. And as project managers, we're so busy. We are looking for, the easier way to get things done. If right now things are cumbersome in opening a project, hopefully you learn some things from this session that'll make that easier. Okay, so I am going to share the screen and you will see my desktop here, and you should see the words boot camp instead of my name up here because we just did a live boot camp and I'm using that instance just so we have everything pre-set up to show you the ultimate workflows or the best workflows. If there's anybody who does not see the visual, then right now, then that would be a problem. But if you were previously just seeing the Workamajig logo, and you would see now my mouse moving around on this page. So I know there was a couple questions in there about that. Okay, so I also have a tab open along the top here that is our support guide, and you can get to that. That's a separate website. So if you just go to support.workamajig.com, you can get to this. If you're not familiar with it, it's got a ton of really great information, including previous webinars. This is where the webinar will be posted. So if you were looking for webinar information on the main page when you're searching, or on any page, if you want to search just the word webinar, and then you'll find the previous webinars and also this one once it's posted. Now I've gone ahead and navigated to I just searched project manager here. So I have this project manager overview page. We're not going to cover this page other than to say this is a great resource. And if you say, well, I want to know more about something that you learned today, like the Today Project Manager page, dashboards, graphs. We're not covering graphs or any of that today. We're just talking workflow. But this is a great place, stop jumping off place to get to other areas of the system. Anywhere where it's blue here and you hover over it, that's going to take you to another page. And then within that, there's even other pages. So you can dive really deep into these other areas if you would like. One that we'll talk about briefly today, but is usually its own 1-hour session, is project templates. So if you're not using project templates today, you'll get an overview today. You won't really learn how to set them up, but this would be, if you say, well, we really like that, we'd like to templatize some things so we're not always starting from scratch, then definitely reach out to your account manager and they will get you the full training on that. So we're going to really kind of focus mostly on project intake. So you can see using a template, start a new project, and then what are the things that need to be updated in that project? How can I create an estimate from that project? Talk a little about project requests, not always for in-house users, but that's kind of how we originally imagined folks using those if they were in-house, but certainly you can use them for a regular ad agency too. And the opportunity section, which is our sales CRM piece, and we kind of will go over that. So I'm going to navigate away from here. I really just wanted to show you this, make you aware of it so that you know where to find the webinar and so that you can kind of deeper dive on some of the things we're going to touch on lightly today. All right, well, of course, creating projects in Workamajig is done very frequently, and we want to make that super simple. So if you're on your main menu page, you're going to see lots of quick places to start a project. One, you're going to see the plus icon for the project dot here. Also, if you were just anywhere in the system, your main menu here has a project manager section, and this is another place where you could start the project. All of these open the exact same screen. So I'm here, I'm just going to open the project from here. And then I have a pre-set up client in the system, but definitely setting up of clients is really important and feeds into the project process because you can set lots of things at the client level. You can set what invoice estimates and estimate on the project you want, how you want the look and feel of those. You can set if you're going to use a team on the project, which I'll model for us today because I did set a team on this client record. You can set all different types of project defaults there so that each time you open the project, it comes through and you don't have to select all of that. So we're not going to cover that today, but that's definitely something you can train with your account manager. The setting up of clients is at least a half-hour session. So definitely reach out if you're taking on that role recently and you want to make sure that you're setting up clients to optimize the project workflow. We're just going to call this our logo test project because that's the type of project that we're going to create today. And then we recommend that you copy from a template. You will see an option in here to copy from another project, and that's not necessarily invalid. It's just that if you, and we default copy from a template because we recommend it, but if you set up templates that have workflows in them, waterfall style project management schedules where you're saying this has to happen, once this is completed, this next step can start, and you're allocating hours hopefully in there, saying which services are needed, populating that then pulls through to the project. So I am going to show you, I have that template set up. I'm going to show you this workflow, but then I'm going to go back to the templates and we're going to talk about what are the fields that I populated in the template that then were available for me to use on the project? Because if you do take one thing from this training, it would be we'd like you to revisit your templates, even if you've been using Workamajig for many years, and just update them, make sure that that's still how you do things. If you find yourself every time you copy from a template changing something, well, let's change it at that template level so you're not always having to make that change. So we will revisit, but for now, we just want to show you the workflow for starting a project if you didn't have a project request form and you weren't using our opportunities. Now, the template to copy from, I have pre-set up templates in here and they're usually by project type. So most people have a template for each type of project that they do because the tasks would change based on the type of project it is. There's other ways you could do it, but the Workamajig way is by project type. So I'm going to select the logo. I could put a description in here and you can pull that then through to estimates and even to billing. But for now, we're just going to go straight to the bottom of this where it shows that I've selected a team. Now, the client name is Microsoft. I've created a team called Microsoft, but You don't have to create the teams based on the clients. You could have a team that's your web design team. You could have a team that is for logo type projects, and people can be on multiple teams. So, and you also could not have a team at all. You could say, you know, the way we work is I'll build the team once the project is set up. And I'll show you that, how you would do that if you didn't have a team populated here. But for those of you who are thinking about trying something new and aren't using teams, I wanted to add a team in here so you could see how easily you could have folks added. And then the project type is coming from the template. And of course, I said I have templates based on project type. So I have one for each type. The other thing here is it says that the project status is sales opportunity. You might not recognize that because these are customizable, and you can have whatever your team calls these things in whatever order you would kind of have projects go through set up in your back end. So that this is what ours defaults to is a sales opportunity, and that's mostly so that if you were using our opportunity feature, it would automatically default to that that project status. But if you want a different project status, like, well, we want to go right into production and then have it show immediately on folks' Today Creative page to start working on their assignments, you could do that. But I want to model kind of what's typical. And typically, if I'm not using an opportunity, then I would put it in a pending status. And that gives me a chance to refine things and really decide when I want to push it so that the folks that are assigned see it on their Today Creative page. There's also rules surrounding these statuses that your team would set. So in the pending status, for instance, we have our settings, the default settings set that you can't put time to a project. So, you would have to put it into production before folks would see it and be able to enter their time. So, if you don't know what all the settings mean and how things are set up, and maybe you're newer to your organization, that'd be a good thing to ask your administrator, your Workamajig administrator, because even if they themselves weren't involved in setting it up, maybe they've had the tool for a long time and they weren't here during the original setup, they would at least have access to that area of the system and be able to show you what the settings were. Maybe even discuss changing them if you learned something today that seems like it would streamline things or make things easier for you. I'm going to hit save, and you'll notice that all of the fields that were on that previous page could still be updated here because I didn't choose a completion date for this project. Maybe you don't even know if you're just opening the project to get something started and you're not quite sure what the completion date is, then you can add that at any time. You do have to have the start date, but it defaults to today. And if you were to say, well, no, this truly doesn't start until next week, you could come in here and change the start date as well. I'm going to go ahead and pick a completion date, and I'm going to intentionally pick a completion date that's pretty quick, that's going to happen fast. And that's because I want to show you how you could adjust the project schedule from what it defaulted in from the template to accommodate a rush job. And so I'm going to just pick Monday the 7th here, and I'm going to hit save. Now, notice that we don't have this auto ID tasks turned on. You probably do. That's the default, that it is turned on. And we actually recommend that the default be set to auto ID your tasks. Some people have workflows where they try to come up with an ID. We really don't recommend that. We really recommend the system auto IDing the task, mostly because it's hard to be consistent. You have to do more training. It is more difficult to set it up that way, and you really don't get any additional benefit. So if right now you're seeing like custom IDs that are associated with tasks, it might be a good time to ask, why do we do it that way? And then you could always loop your trainer in and they could tell you, oh, there's another easier, faster way to do this with auto ID, and then you don't have to set up those customized IDs. So I think it probably set those up, but I'm going to check that box since we're right here anyway. And usually that box is automatically checked because it's in your transaction preferences. If you, like me, saw that it wasn't checked, again, that's something that we can talk to your Workamajig administrator and make sure that the transaction preferences are set to allow for that auto ID. All right, so I'm not really going to change anything else in here. Everything else just populated. I'm listed as the account manager. That's me, Bootcamp. I'm Marlene. This would be your first and last name. And this is coming from the client record as well. So if you wanted to have a separate person be listed as the project manager because you think of these as separate roles, if you drop this down, it's just going to show everyone who's in your in your system as an employee, and you can choose a different project manager. The main thing that this would affect is if you have transaction preferences in the background that say, oh, when the estimate is being approved internally, it should be routed to the account manager or the project manager. So these really only come into play if you have settings that reference these fields. Also, if you run reporting and you want to use it as a filter to say, well, I want to see all of my projects where I'm listed as the account manager, or projects where I'm listed as the project manager. So that's a new-ish feature that we have both those fields. It used to just be an account manager field. So if were trained many years ago and you're thinking, I don't remember there being a project manager field, there hasn't been, forever. It was just probably within the last couple of years that we added a project manager field. And by the way, if you say, well, I don't even see project manager field on and that is something we'd like to use, it could just be that we need to activate that feature. Some features are not auto activated. They're kind of only if somebody asks about them, do we activate them? So that's a really good reason to attend these kind of webinars to see new things maybe that you don't even see automatically on your account. Okay, so we are going to go back to the project schedule. And this is where people have a lot of questions and we see a lot of variations in how people use this tool. We're going to talk today about the way we think it was designed to be used. But if you're using it a different way and it's working for you, that's totally fine. It's just that we want to show you like the optimized version so that you know how things feed through to other areas of the system. So all these tasks were coming from the template that I created. And that template has these projects set up, concept development, production, and then there's a roll-up task. We call this an overarching roll-up task, parent task. I've heard it called many different things. Really what it's indicating is that we're grouping these two tasks below it together. And so the nature of this task is really more for looking at reporting, or maybe even pulling this into an estimate, something like that. You would never put time to this task. You can't traffic this task. You really can't do anything with the task that's the roll-up task. It's these tasks that you would be actioning. So assigning folks, having them put time. And sometimes I'll see a roll-up task and all the people will be assigned, and then the system won't even let you assign anybody to the detail task. And my first question for those folks is always, well, what purpose do the default tasks serve? So if you can't put time to them, you can't see them to traffic, you can't bill them because they'd have to have, in order to put time to them, they'd have to have that track budget selected. And that, if you're not familiar with the track budgets feature, we're going to open some of these so you can see in the upper right-hand corner, these boxes are typically collapsed. The first one, if you hover over it, it'll tell you that that's the Gantt chart. We'll cover that in a minute. I'm going to close it for now. The second one here is the templates. So what that is for is if you need to add additional tasks once the project is opened, and I'll be showing you that feature in a moment as well, but we'll close it for now. And then this final one is really the one that a lot of people have open for the entire time they're building their schedule, or if they're updating their schedule that's been copied from a template. And that's, if you hover over it, it's called Show Task Detail, but it's just additional information. And most of these fields you could pull into columns. So if you're looking at my column settings and comparing it to what you have on your system and saying, well, that looks a little different, that's not what I have, I would like that, I want to change what I have. If you have the access, it would be under More, and then Display Options here. And then, well, this Display Options actually works in conjunction. There's another one that I'll show you in just a bit. But this is things like, oh, do I want the schedule automatically expanded with these carets with the details under it when opened? Do I want the schedule to automatically save, or do I want to control when I make my changes, my saves? Do I want the task predecessors to automatically come through, or do I want to control when we enter them? So some nice things here that you might say, well, mine looks different, or my function is different than what I saw in the webinar, and that could be because you have different options selected here. But as far as the column headers and displaying information that you see here in the task detail panel that's open, that you're going to say is system settings. It's hiding from me there. I had to scroll down to see it. So system settings, and that's going to be edit the columns. And then here's all of the options that could display. So we won't cover all of these, but this is just an area for you to explore. If you were to say, this isn't optimal for how I work, it doesn't show it the order I want to see it, you can definitely change the order as well. So if I go up here to display order, if you can see what's being displayed here for task status assigned days, you could move these and have them be in different areas. So if I wanted the line number to be next to the days, for instance, and I'm really just doing that so that you have an option to see one move. And then there's some more different settings in here as well. So things like, should people all be able to edit the column sets? Maybe we don't want everyone to be able to do that. So you can set that by security group over here. So we're going to hit save. And I'm just going to say that I want to reset everything. It's red because it wants to alert you that, hey, you're not just doing this for you, you're doing it for everyone. And then the next red thing I want to draw your attention to is the fact that the tasks are not going to finish by the due date I've selected here. And I did that intentionally so that you'd be able to see how you're alerted to that. And then to show you that we really don't want you to go and change the dates in here. We want you to change the days. And that's so that, if you do build a kind of a rush schedule, we don't want people to, take 6 days up here and then leave these people all scrambling at the bottom. We want to kind of spread out the reduction in the days if it's a rush project. So, some of this will seem unrealistic, of course, but I'm just trying to show you that the dates change to green whenever you shave days off, and it changes the dates. So rather than change the dates, you change the days. That happens automatically, that they're changed. And then, of course, some of this, you probably couldn't really get this done in one day, but you can change that here, and then you'll see the things change. And I probably made it so that it's just so unrealistic that we'll never get to green. It looks like the closest we could get is getting it done on the 8th. So that's something you would probably negotiate with a client and say, we can do a rush job, but really the quickest we can do is the 8th, not the 7th. And then you would go and change it in your project schedule so that you had the new due date of the 8th. So you never want to start the very beginning of your project with a red task. You want to kind of make sure you've given everybody the time that they need. Now, let's open this panel again because I want to talk about a couple of other things that you may be using today. One is the constraint, and we default the constraint to as soon as possible. And in a template, all of your tasks should be set to as soon as possible. But when we open the project, there are some tasks that lend themselves to these different constraints. You don't want to fall into the habit of putting a constraint on every task on just a regular project schedule in order to manipulate the dates, because really the dates are designed to push and pull based on actuals. So if you finish something early, we don't want a must start on date of 2 days later because that'll hold the schedule up. So, the predecessor task, the task that should have been completed, for instance, I can't start my concept development until project setup is completed. So the predecessor task for concept development is project setup. If I finish the project setup in 1 hour, well, that means that even today you could start working on the concept development. So that's another reason we tell folks it's so important to do time entries even throughout the day. A lot of people like to wait and do time entries at the end of the day, but if you have a lot of quick moving project schedules, it's really better to do your project or time entries as the day goes on, so that tasks that have predecessors come up for the next person to work on. Because you can see this would probably be 2 different people. It's 2 different roles or services, project management and art design. So we are going to try to leave everything as soon as possible, as much as possible. But if it's something that you would have to hold up, like say this was a photo shoot, and that was the project that we were doing, and the actual location, the model, the photographer, all of that is booked to start on a particular day. Well, even if the task above it, the predecessor task, is complete, we can't start the photo shoot early. So that is a legitimate reason to say, well, let's use must start on, and then it lets you pick a date. And then in that case, it is legitimate that you would want to pick a specific date because you want to see things turn red if they're not getting done on time for that photo shoot. You want to also see that things have to hold up. If we finish early, we can't just keep forging on with the schedule. We have to wait for that photo shoot. So there are, legitimate reasons to use the constraints, but usually as soon as possible is what you want to leave it to. Some of these others, and we have in the help guide something that explains every single constraint and explains when you would use it. And so I won't go over that now. But if you just were in here and you put constraints as your search in the support guide, it explains every one of them. But I do want to touch on one that is fairly new. It's not brand new. It's been around for a little while, but it might be new from if you have been trained a long time ago. And that's duration of project. And that's a good one to use if you're like, say you have an overhead project where the tasks are more like just buckets of time where people are putting PTO, vacation, that sort of thing. Well, you don't want to have to come up with, well, how many days are in this year? And, try to back out of that. If you just say duration of project, the system will automatically calculate the days for you, and it'll select whatever you have as the project due date. So if you opened one on 1/1/2022 and it went through 12/31/2022 because it was overhead, it would calculate that. You don't always see the option of duration of project. It does have to be a project task that's a standalone task like these first three. If it's one of these that's dependent and is as part of a roll-up task, then you won't see that option. So another reason people might use duration of project is sometimes for project management time. You don't necessarily want to allocate hours throughout the schedule for the project manager. You can if you like to do that, but in order to make things easier or simpler, you can just have a project management task at the bottom of your schedule, and that you usually would status to duration of the project. And it has to see it first when we hit save so that you get, but that's what I was talking about. Like, notice you won't see duration of project because this looks like it's underneath final art. So I'm going to push it out, and that way it's on its own. And then I'm going to hit save so it remembers, okay, now it's standing alone. And now you'll see the option to pick duration. And I actually might even have to close this and refresh the page. So, if you enter something and you right away don't see a solution for it, it could just be that things need to be refreshed. So the system is picking up that change that you made. So now I can select duration of project. So that's a good reason why you might use it in a project schedule that is not like an overhead project. And then it just pops in the dates that you said the project is going to be occurring. Okay, so I am going to navigate away from this and talk about getting these folks assigned. Not always are you able to create a team that you're going to be able to push out and say, okay, I know all the people that are going to be doing all of these tasks. Sometimes you have to look at a staff schedule, which we're not going to cover today. That's our traffic training. But sometimes you'd have to look at a staff schedule to decide who is going to be available to do this next task. And you might only know this first assignment. So you can just come in here, click, and pick a person to assign. However, I'm going to model kind of the quickest, easiest way if you do have a team. So I'm going to navigate away from here and go to the team tab. And these folks are here because in that Microsoft client, I had selected that I needed the Microsoft team. So that copied over whenever I created the project. And that's how all these users are showing here. Now, whoever creates the project, they automatically get added to the team. So you can see I'm on the team because of that. Everybody else here was included because they were on the Microsoft team. And then if you don't have an approved estimate yet on the project, even if you have an estimate, but it's not approved, the keyword there is an approved estimate, then if you say auto assign, this little paragraph, I'll kind of summarize this for you, is saying that it's going to override, if you have an approved estimate that does not match what's in your schedule, it's going to look at the approved estimate to push folks. And so usually we want you to have an estimate that matches the schedule, but for some reason, sometimes people can't or don't want to, but we wanted to give a warning here. So that's what this little grayed out paragraph is a warning saying, hey, if you have something different in your estimate, we're going to look at your estimate. If you don't have an approved estimate or don't have an estimate at all, then we're going to look at whatever you've built here. So I'm going to hit OK because there's no estimate on this project yet. Then we have the little, are you sure you want to? And I said, yes, I'm sure. And then if I close out of this and go back to the schedule, you'll see that everybody's assigned. So before this was blank and it just said the service. And now based on the team that I have in the back end, everyone's populated here and their hours are here. So this is what they're going to see on their Today Creative page, that I have 1.5 hours to work on this. If you say, well, I templatize that 1.5 hours, and that is what's typical, but in this particular case, for this particular project, I need to add additional hours, that's something you can add or change, at any time. I haven't created the estimate yet. So when I do create my estimate, I'm going to do it the quickest and easiest way, and I'm going to pull it from the schedule. So any updates that I make here then will be available, and I'll see that and when I create my estimate here in just a moment. So I did say that I wanted to show you how you could copy tasks either from another project. When you hover over it, it says that it's templates, but we actually allow you to copy tasks from other projects, previous projects as well. The problem with that, this is a test account, it has very little data, so it's already letting me see the projects, and if I drop it down, it has everything for me. In your system, if you've been in there for a while, it'll probably give you some gray wording down here that says you have too many projects to display all if you have thousands of projects in there. So in that case, you would just, it's a type ahead field. So if you knew, oh, I created it this year, if you knew the client code that it was created for, then it starts to filter it down, and then you do see a drop down. So that's if you want to copy tasks from another project. If you want to copy them from another template, that's why you might see a lot of people like lead off all their templates with a letter T. And you'll see that when we visit the templates area here in just a bit. But they do that so that they can quickly and easily search in areas like this. So if I said, well, even though this is a logo piece, there are some tasks in the direct mail piece that I want to bring in, I could either bring them all in, and then it just populates them all, or I could have just selected particular task and just click and drag them over here as well. If you said, well, I did that and boy, I wish I hadn't done that. If you don't have that autosave turned on, you can just close your screen, say, no, I do not want to save my changes, go back in, and then you have your regular schedule. So we default to the autosave being turned off, especially for brand new users or people that are new to setting up project schedules, because it allows you to explore, to try things, and then say, oh, I did that, but I didn't like that. I don't want to do that. And then you can just close it and refresh the screen, and you'll have what you had. So it's kind of a way to step back or undo something that you tried and didn't like. A lot of you are familiar with Gantt charts already. I won't spend a lot of time on this other than to say you can see a Gantt chart here. A lot of people ask about printing these for clients. That's absolutely available. It's again under your more. Almost everything that you want to do that you don't see immediately on the page, it's going to be under more. So if you decide that you want to print these, you can. If you hit print, you'll see that there's different ways you can print it. Do I want to print all the task assignments? Do I want to print a client-facing schedule that doesn't include users, and it does include a due comment, but not the user? So lots of different options in here. And if you need help kind of deciding what works best for your team, your account managers are going to be a great resource for that. But definitely if you say print the Gantt, it's going to say, well, what do you want? Do you want all? Do you want it to look at days? And I'm just going to print one just really quickly here so you can see what it looks like. So, it's definitely something that you could present to the client if you wanted to, and you can control what shows and what doesn't with those settings. All right, I'm going to close this. I know we're moving fairly quickly, and that's only because we do only have an hour, but I do want to pause just for a second because I do see somebody has a question here from Joanne, and it says, are we supposed to have a visual? I'm only seeing the Workamajig icon. I think that's old, so we're going to dismiss that. But is there anybody who has a current question for anything that we've been talking about so far? Oh, I see Denise does. It says, hi, when you update the settings for this, will it update for all your jobs or just this job? When you're updating the settings here to say like, oh, I want to see these different columns, I bet that's what she was referring to. She asked that a few minutes ago. That is, you decide, you're updating for everything that you see or everything for your security group. So, but it is making it against all projects. So you wouldn't just be changing the columns or changing these things for just this project. Other settings are just for this project if you were updating them, like if you were putting, a constraint, or if you were adding a status or description to the task, that is just for this project. But things like changing column views, that's for all projects. And you can decide whether it's for everybody in that security group or, whatever the case is needed. I am going to show you a quick way. These predecessors came over from the template, which of course is ideal. But if you add additional project tasks, which I only added project management, it wouldn't need a predecessor, so I wouldn't have needed to make a change here. But say I didn't undo my selection where I added a large group of tasks, and sometimes you even want to grab a task and move it within your project schedule. Well, you don't want to have to go into every single line of the schedule and change the predecessor. That can be a little bit confusing because when you look at it, you just have to know, which predecessor to select. Instead, if you want it to be more like a waterfall style project management, you can select all and look at all these new options you have up here. So if you link them together, then that puts in the predecessor. In my case, the predecessors are here already. Maybe I've added additional tasks. So I'm going to start with unlinking them. And then if I were to look, I'm going to save it first, so make sure it looks right. If I look at my Gantt chart, oh, everything's starting on the same day. So you might say, well, that's not really what I wanted. I want to link them again. And it puts the predecessors back in. I'll hit save. And then you see a more traditional Gantt chart, and it is respecting the predecessors there. Now, a lot of times we have tasks that can start simultaneously, so they can share the same predecessor. That you wouldn't be able to do with the link and the unlink. You would have to do that individually. So if you were to say concept development production could start simultaneously, which wouldn't make sense, but pretend it does, then I would change this predecessor to also be number one, line one. So what that means is once line one is complete, I could start concept development and production. Even if they had different lengths of days that they were being done, they would still start on the same day. Right now with this kind of, one right after another waterfall stepping that we've done, you're just seeing, each one right after the other. And of course it skips the weekends. We'll also skip holidays. That you have to set that up. We're not going to go over how to do that today, but if that's something you haven't been doing and you'd like to, step-by-step instructions in the help guide or reach out to your account manager. Okay, so we're going to navigate away from this screen and we're going to talk a little bit about the estimate, mostly in the interest of time since we only have 20 minutes. So we're going to start a new estimate. It doesn't matter which one of these plus icons I select, they both take you to the same screen. And if you're doing anything other than by task and service as your estimate type, that's fine if it works for you. But you are losing some of the ability to see things differently in a budget screen. You're losing some reporting capability. So we default to task and service, and because that is the most flexible option for creating invoicing, if you're creating time and materials invoicing, and for seeing details on the estimate. And the detailed estimate is coming, it's two-part really. It's coming from your templates that are set up in the back end. So they have your logo, they have your font, they have your different ways that you like to see things. And then they also take into consideration, well, what data is actually on that screen? So that's why we say task and service gives you the most flexibility. I've selected auto pull from schedule. And so that's going to just pull in all of my hours with the dollar figures that are associated with the different services. And you're going to see that here. And what you're seeing, you're going to make the changes if you need to make them on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side it's indicating what are you looking at. So project setup is project management, 2.5 hours. Concept development is art and creative design for 4.5 hours at $125 an hour. So if you said, well, we really can charge them $3,000, or they're willing, it's a fixed fee, and then we know they're willing to pay more than what this is scoping out at, rather than up the hours, because we really want the hours to match what's in the schedule if possible, I would just gross up the amount. So you can change this to whatever amount you want as a gross until you get to the $3,000. So the only thing to watch out for with this is, of course, it does change the rate. So if you show that level of detail on an estimate, well, then you might get some pushback like, oh, why is it $183 an hour for art and creative design? So it just kind of depends on how you display this information to the client. But you can always work with your account manager to really nail this down so it's working easily for you and you can use the pull from schedule. So once this is all set up, you would review your estimate settings, make sure that you're using the estimate template that corresponds with how you want this to be viewed. And then you may even be routing it for people internally or externally. We're not going to spend a lot of time in estimates today just because it's about project workflows, but we do want to show you some of the neat features. So once this is approved, and you won't always, it might say submit here if you don't have the security rights to approve it, but of course I'm an admin on the account, so I'm going to approve it. Once it's approved, then that is your budget. And if you do budget billing or what we call fixed fee billing, that would be necessary in order to bill it correctly as well. When we hit print here, we're not going to see too pretty of an estimate because it doesn't have a logo. It's not set up the way you necessarily would want it set up. But what I wanted to show you is the level of detail you can either decide to show or not show. So this one is set up to show incredible levels of detail that you may not want to share with a client. But how this is presented is based on what you have in here and also what this layout is telling the system to do. So we can help you design these layouts so that they're giving you exactly what you want. We won't go over that in the session today. Now that I have that approved estimate, I can see it on the budget. And because I did it by task and service estimate, then I'm going to have multiple options. I can see it by item, which there's not a lot of data in here there's no actual data. There's just the budget data. I can see it by the type of service. They can see it by the task. So lots of different ways to do it. You wouldn't use by person unless you're an internal marketing group, and ask your account manager about that. We don't really train on how to do things by person. Usually everything is geared towards by the service. There's of course a person associated with that service, but the reporting and how it all feeds into traffic and everything is done by service. So all right, now the last step would be that you would put this into production or whatever you call your status where people can start putting time to it. And that's really it for project setup. There's so many things you could do in here, but those are like the basics for what we recommend and what it's going to give you the most data in other parts of the system. So I'm going to close out of this because I want to cover those other two options if I'm not just going to start a project, if I'm going to have a workflow on the front end that is a little bit different before the project is actually created. And the first thing that we're going to talk about is the project request form. So I mentioned at the top of the call that the project request form is most commonly used for internal marketing groups, but anyone can use a project request form. Basically, you design in the back end how you want the questions and everything to appear for a project request. And somebody did a test one here called, I need a brochure, but you would have different project request forms. Usually you have a project request form for every type of project you do, just like you have a template for every type of project you do. So this one, back-end settings are like, well, who has access to this form? Who should be approving it? Are there spec sheets that have to be filled out in conjunction with this type of project that's being requested? So we're not going to go over how to build any of this today, but that is something that if you want to learn about, your account manager would be more than happy to do a session, and you want to allow about an hour for that. So, but we have one in here, of course, that we can use as our example. And so we're going to say from the main menu, if you wanted to start a project request, you would click on project request. Now you don't even have to be a paid user in Workamajig to do this. There's a feature and there's actually a webinar in there that you can watch about free user contacts and about how they can use project requests. And I think I actually did that one if you look at the one from 2021. So you can go back and watch that too if this is really something that seems like it would be you want to add to your toolbox. So I'm going to say I need a brochure. Again, I would pick the Microsoft client just because we're trying to kind of show the different ways you could do the same thing. I would say this is the logo project. And then I could put a due date, but if I hit next, it takes me to the different questions. So these are designed in the back end. You design the questions, things like this is more like creative brief type information. Who's the primary audience? What should we be avoid in talking to this audience? So you can really, it doesn't have to be these questions. These are just some questions that we loaded that are typical for a creative brief. But it's totally customizable, and the answers are customizable. Like if you want check boxes for answers, radio buttons for answers, dates for answers, drop downs for answers. So you really program all of this, but you don't have to have any programming skills whatsoever. We teach you how to do it, and it's really very simple. So that will be a great one to do if you're interested in learning more about that. When I hit next, it's going to show more information to fill out, things like bleed size, trim size. This is more like the spec sheet information that you need. And so I'm just going to hit next because this is really just a good example. Now you also could add an additional spec sheet. So this would be some training, like if you say, well, we're going to add the spec sheet for them and you'll be prompted to fill it out, or do we want to add a spec sheet manually, and then you'd have to train them which one to select. And that is so that you don't have to have a project request form for each project type. You could make them more generic and just have one project request form and then train folks to pick the correct spec sheet. And then I'm just going to hit submit. Of course, I could add an attachment if I needed to show them how something looks. Now, I know there's a couple of questions. I'm going to address the questions in just a moment, but I just want to finish off. So once it's been submitted, depending on who is set up to have it routed to them to see, oh, I need to approve it, it would be on their bell icon. So mine is on my bell icon because I'm an approver. So I see the project request here. I review the request. If I say yes, it's great. I think it looks good. I would approve it, and I could put a comment in there. Those comments are then able to be pulled into reporting, and you can look at those. But once it's created, you have a different field. You didn't have this option to create a project until it's approved. So now you'll see when I create project, well, there I am. I'm back to that same screen that we already covered, and everything is coming in. I didn't have to pick the template. The template came in from the project request form. I didn't have to pick any of these options. They all came through. So we're not going to hit save. We're not going to finish this because we've already showed you that process. This is just to show another way to bring in a project, and that is through project request form. So I do see that there's some questions. So I'm going to pause and answer those, and then we'll talk about the opportunity. So someone says, when resources leave and they're not being replaced on a project, what's the recommended practice in terms of removing them from a project? Should they be dropped from a project task, dropped from the project team? What happens to their actual hours on the project if they get dropped? So the good news is anything that they've historically put in, you're not going to lose when you remove them from the project and the team. And we actually have a workflow for this, and it's called offboarding. So we won't get into that on this call because we just don't have time, but that's a really great question. And if you go into offboarding, this will answer all the questions that you have about that more than likely. It talks about step-by-step where to go to do this, how do you remove them, how do you replace them with other people. It doesn't even have to only be project centered. If they're time approvers or they do other more complicated things in the system, this works for that too. But of course, the main reason people do this is exactly what was asked, which is to remove them from a project. So we can go over that with you with your account manager. The answer is absolutely. We have a workflow for that. And it's in the employee record. So if you don't have access to the employee records, that might be workflow wise internally at your agency that you have to contact the admin and say, oh, so-and-so has left, please remove them from all the projects and replace them with Marlene. Or if you can't replace them with a person yet, because there is no person to replace them with, you can just say, return it to the service it was assigned to. And if you're using your staff schedule, you'd see it as, oh, this needs to be assigned out to somebody on the staff schedule. That's why I say we really don't have time to go over it, only because it can get more complicated, but in a good way, in a way that'll meet all your needs. We just need to kind of talk to you about what your workflows are for that too. So great question though. And then on the spec sheets, can you indicate some fields as required? Absolutely. Just so we don't trip ourselves up when we're training on it and we just want to show people next screen, next screen, next screen, we don't make anything required. But yes, absolutely, you can make things required, and most people do. Again, we just want to be able to click through the screen so you can see them, but that's a really great question, and the answer is yes. All right. Maybe some people might have put questions in this other one, so just want to make sure there's no one in here. Great. Okay, no current questions. Okay, so in the last 10 minutes that we have, we're going to talk about in starting a project from an opportunity. So if your team is using some other type of sales program, of course, Salesforce is probably the most common one that people use. The Workamajig can completely and totally replace that. Now, if you're getting pushback from your salespeople, they're like, "Oh, I really don't want to move," well, they can still use aspects of our sales features that then flow through to the projects. So, when we talk about, I showed you how to create an estimate after the project was already created. Well, in real life, in the real world, we create the estimate before we create the project a lot of times. And the project is required in order to start an estimate in Workamajig. So if you're not new to Workamajig and you're thinking, well, what is she going to show us? Because there is no way to start an estimate in Workamajig unless there is a project. That is true unless you have an opportunity. So under your salesperson dot here, if you were to say, well, I'm going to start a new opportunity in this system, and you would pick, a lot of this we have pre-set up, like the company's already set up. But if it was brand new, well, you'd have to first set up the company and the contact. So it defaults here, but I could be checking these boxes too and say, well, the company doesn't yet exist. Let me do all of that right on this screen. So it's super convenient. And then we're just going to put test in here for the opportunity name so we can easily find it. Of course, you'd usually pick, your primary contact and that sort of thing. And then it defaults to it's the initial contact and open, but these are totally customizable. Again, we're not really going to train on this because this is a whole session in and of itself. I just want to kind of show you that there is training on this and you can definitely use it. This is the main thing I want to show you. Enable advanced features. I don't like the terminology advanced features because it's like enable the project feature would might be better. But for one of a better term, it's enable advanced features. But if you read this, it says it enables features such as estimates, creating a schedule, files, enabling time tracking to the opportunity. But it is almost like a shadow project that it's creating. So you'll be very familiar with the look of it because it looks like a project. So once you say the advanced features are enabled, you're like, well, this is a project that's being created. Now we start using that project terminology, right? And you have I'm going to pick a logo so it's something you're familiar with seeing. I might even pick the Microsoft team. I could put it directly into the sales opportunity status, and then I'm going to hit save. So now I get an estimate. So I could create my estimate. I can still auto pull from the schedule because you're going to see, oh, it remembers and it has the schedule that's in that particular template. So this is a way that you can start doing things that are project related. And then once all of this is approved and you've won the business, because we're going to win the business, right? If you don't, you can just close the opportunity and that's fine too, but we're almost always going to win the business. So we're going to say, make the project live. And at that point, it's going to give it an actual project number. So it's going to say, oh, well, now tell me more. What's the description for the project if you have one and need one? Maybe now you don't want it in the initial contact phase. We have a signed contract. And if you hit show more down here, you might be filling out, oh, when's the forecasted close date for this? And this all pulls into another feature, which we're not going to train on today. But if you are interested in, you can search for the revenue forecasting webinar. It's super great, really neat information. And your account manager would be happy to train you on that. That's about an hour session too. So we're going to say save. And then now this is actually a project. So if I click on this, well, this sure looks familiar, right? So this workflow, and here's my schedule. Here's all the things we talked about. And then if I were to navigate and look at the estimate, it's in there, it's saved. So this is really best, most agencies probably should be starting a project through an opportunity. And ideally, their sales team should be using Workamajig. So that way, everything's integrated, everything's in one space. We can track everything, we can report on everything. We can say how many of these opportunities turned into projects, how many opportunities were closed without turning it into a project. So a lot of data that can be pulled from that if everything's integrated and in the same place. Any questions on this one? Let me look at our chat here. Somebody says, that was quick, Marlene. How'd you get to that opportunity screen again? So I'm going to show you that just again for the question, but also so that you have it on the recording. And then someone says, well, how can we set up auto scheduling? Where is that feature? So I'll show you both of those. And are we able to put multiple projects under an opportunity? So you can put, we're going to start with the last question asked because that's an easy one. When it says, can you put multiple projects under an opportunity? One of the options when we were creating that opportunity, and we're going to create another one again, just so we're answering the other question of how'd you get there? But there was an option to pick campaign. And if you pick campaign, then of course you're putting multiple projects. And if you're not familiar with campaigns in Workamajig, they're really just an umbrella to pull projects together that are going to be usually billed together and usually have one budget. So there's a full campaign training as well. And all of those we do have webinars for all of those. So you wouldn't necessarily have to, if you want to just learn about it today, you're kind of on a roll and you're interested in it right now, you actually don't have to book a call with your trainer. You can just search the webinars because all of those topics that I've kind of touched on have their own webinar in there. So, but yeah, great question. So that we're going to show that. And at the same time, we're going to ask, how does that auto scheduling get set? That was, and with our last 5 minutes, we really want to just look at the templates because that's coming from the template. But before we do that, we're just going to really quick do the opportunity again because it was fast. So salesperson dot new opportunity. And then we'll just do Microsoft again, just because I know that one works and it's in here. Put something in here so we can get to the next screen because I wanted to show that when you say enable the advanced features, there's a campaign option. So once you set campaign option, well, then you can do make campaign live and do multiple projects. And we're kind of running out of time, so we don't have time to show you all that, but absolutely get with your project manager and they'll help you do that. So I'm sorry, your account manager. I'm calling it project manager now too, part of Workamajig. Okay, so last but not least, and this answers one of the questions that was in our Q&A here about putting auto schedules in, that is coming from that template. So let's go to project manager. We're going to go to this project list only because that's a quick and easy way to get to the templates. This is really just like your active project screen and a dashboard. We're not going to cover that in this session, but the project templates are located on this screen. So and the one we were using earlier was logo, so I'll keep consistent with using that again to try to help the continuity and make it make sense. But if we go to logo and schedule, you can see this is that schedule. So those allocated hours, that service, all of that came from the template. So really, Workamajig templates are the backbone of Workamajig. You can see they touch everything. They touch billing, they touch the scheduling or trafficking, they touch even sales and opportunities because you pull this in. So having a good set of templates is key. And our recommendation is a template for each project type you do, a project workflow for each project type that you do. And you don't have to have these roll-up tasks. Those do make it a little more difficult to build the schedule. A very easy schedule is just inserting row after task after task after task, and then linking the predecessors. And some people say, well, we don't really want to do the predecessors. That's a lot of work. We're not quite clear on that. You do lose a lot if you don't use the predecessors. We don't have, the workflows are all built around the assumption that you have predecessors because, not every task can be started when the project starts. So we have to complete some of the tasks before the next ones can start. So predecessors are key. They also feed into the staff schedule, which is your whole entire traffic dashboard. And, it doesn't show correctly and on the right dates unless you have predecessors in there. So predecessors are huge. And of course, right on my example, I have like one service on each one of these tasks, but you might have a more complicated task that has multiple services, multiple people on there. And you notice I don't have any people in my templates. That's mostly because, somebody asked a question earlier about offboarding. we have people that leave. And if every time somebody leaves and they were in a role that's on every template, well, now I have to update every single template I have in this system. So you can avoid that if you do everything by service. And then it's always quick and easy. Like we showed, if you want to build a team and push them out, you don't have to go into each individual task and put the person in. That's time consuming. But with that auto assign, you can just get them in there. And even if you auto assign and you have people assigned and that changes, well, that's no problem. Those changes can be handled in mass against many projects from the staff schedule. So that's another thing with offboarding. If you don't like that offboarding feature that we showed and you instead want to go to the staff schedule, hand select who to reassign, it's super simple to do there. So that's a good topic to cover with your account manager, your trainer, and they can walk you through different scenarios. They have a test account like this. So even if you don't want to mess with your real data, but you kind of want to see how that would work, they'd be more than happy to do that for you. Okay, looks like we have another question about templates. Can templates be changed if used? Absolutely, great question. Carolyn, you're right. Sometimes, in fact, we actually recommend that every 6 months you review your templates and make sure that it's still true what's in there. And sometimes, you might have built the template when you were new and to Workamajig, you didn't have the data to pull to say, is this right? This feels right. But now, if you've been in the system for a while, you can pull the data and say, historically, how much time do we spend on a task like this, a logo task of project setup? And so you can see the data and make your changes to allocated hours based on that. So that is a really great question. You even can inactivate templates if they've been used. Say you say, I don't really like this at all. I just want to make this inactive and I want to start over with a new template. You can absolutely do that. They're unlike things like, you can't delete an employee, for instance, that's put time. You can delete a template because they're just a static thing in the system that we're copying from each time. So they are a little bit different than other data that's in Workamajig. That's a great question. Let's see if we have any other questions here. We're right at time, so we have time for one more. And somebody says, well, how do you actually create the roll-up category, that final art category? That's a great question. So let me show you really quickly. We're going to create a new, so we have final art. I'm going to create a new roll-up category. And it doesn't matter what it says here. I just want to show you the mechanics of it. So when I enter it here, you can see, well, this is not a roll-up. This is nestled under the final art. We don't want that. We want to push it out. So you're going to say, move the task out. And then until you have another task beneath it, it still is not a roll-up task. So it thinks, oh, you're going to put the schedule, this computer thinks you're just trying to put another task in the line. You have to tell it, well, no, you're going to move this task in. And see how it kind of bolded it and made it with a caret. And now this is the roll-up task. So it's kind of multi-step in process. When you first add the task, you have to make sure it's out at the highest level. And then you have to add another task in order for it to be indicated as the child task of that parent. Really great question. And the advantage to doing something like that is that if you had multiple tasks in here, like you can say, well, final art takes 3 days. And you could even add a column in here that says, and it's 3 hours, so you can roll things up and see it here for phases. Another thing, people call this a phase. So all right. Well, I don't think we have any more time for questions today, but I really appreciate everybody sticking with this. And I know that sometimes out of these webinars, you get more questions than that you didn't even know you had. So we definitely expect to hear from our clients after this. And, no problem to go over any of the things we kind of just touched on lightly in detail and actually show you how to set it up in your system in a meaningful way. So thank you again, everyone, for your time. And I hope you have a great rest of your week.